Наше заседание очень трудно, послеобеденное. Но перед...
And so the expert, and so we continue our deliberations. So he's the expert, just whose presentation will be so exciting and interesting, and so, and no one will be bored, and no one will want to fall asleep. And I'm happy to open this session. And the name of the session is difficult to understand, so I will be listening very carefully to what he has to say about the name. Is Emil Pain will be our speaker. He's got many different positions, and so I would say that he was the aide of the President Yeltsin, who was giving good advice to Mr. Yeltsin. Later we'll ask how many pieces of advice Mr. Yeltsin took in point, and he's a professor, and he is head of three different departments, chairs of Higher School of Economics, demography, sociology departments in the Higher School of Economics. This is the quintessence of all this knowledge, because he is the head of three different departments. And so then this reflection, this holistic attitude to life, just covering different subjects, and so he's trying just to attempt rationally evaluate the reality, and this is what we'll be happy to listen to. Thank you. And he is the person who believes in our school. He believes in our school and its future. So let me congratulate you on the public holiday. So and that is why. So since we are in the middle of the holiday, so this work will not be burdensome for us, but we'll be happy to work on this wonderful day, the Day of Independence. And so she was saying that I teach at three departments. And this is the combination of expertise and knowledge that I'm going just to give you. But by profession, I'm an ethnographist, and I'm anthropologist, and more than a sociologist. And through this prism of ethnography, so I will try to talk about this the Russia in times of crisis, Russian in the times of so something just a crisis. So then after the crisis, because we're just getting out of the crisis, we're kind of leveling off, getting out of the crisis. So, and what is the causal conditioning? So because what we're living through now, so these the times. So when the absence, as in Russian we say, the absence of times, it means that this kind of the transitional period, interim period, the period of a lull, the period of uncertainty, the period of murky, unknown, undetermined situations. So this is a complicated Russian word, which is very difficult to translate into English. And so it could be the difficult times, uncertain times, the times of the troubles, the times of confusion. So when the future looks murky, looks uncertain, looks vague. And so one of our famous poets, so he was saying that the future is murky, uncertain, and vague, and kind of amorphous. And so this is the kind of times that we are living through now. And the representatives of different schools, classes, political groups, teams, they say the same thing. And so Yuri Shevtsova's book that I received, it's We and the Epoch of Uncertainty. And then at the beginning of 2014, Valery Fedorov, General Director of TSIO, so this is the service whose responsibility is a state service, is a state agency that it ensures the guarantees the interests of the establishment, And so he speaks about this vague, uncertain, amorphous, murky times, and that certainly explains a lot. So this transitional interim period that explains the why we are what we are now. And so Fyodorov was saying that now we are marking time. We're marking time, and so then uncertainty, unpredictability. People are trying to survive, so we're going back to the old archaic values, and we oppose ourselves to the values of modernization. And so actually, so this is the state organization head said that. And this is very telling, because if the public official said that, it means that even he recognizes the uncertainty in our times. Not only the liberals are concerned with that, but even the people in the administration realize that. And in this connection, in absence of the absence of times. So then there are some consolidation mechanisms, are very peculiar to this society in transit. So we speak about propaganda. So before we came here, I spoke with Lena. So propaganda this is the propaganda. It's there, and because the propaganda is very efficient, and but what I want to say, so the propaganda works only when there are circumstances so which actually make people perceptive to the propaganda, and so this certain wavelength, and so then people do not reject this propaganda, but they admit, they perceive this kind of propaganda. And so this society certainly can be consolidated on the basis of xenophobia, fear of strangers. And so I cooperate with Levada Center for many years, and so that's why. So they provide information. So we're going back to 1999. So I can just go back to the beginning of the 90s if we need. So there are three types of phobias. Characteristic of Russia, and so they're growing, those three phobias. So there's certainly some down spikes, up spikes, upward spikes, but so first is the external enemy. So in the questionnaire, so it looks different, but so then fear of external. So are there any external enemies? So this is the blue column, which is above all, and then the internal enemies. External, internal enemies. So whether people support the idea of Russia for Russians, and then another specific one is so to the base enemies, domestic enemies, internal enemies. So then people from the Caucasus and Central Asia, what the attitude of the Russians, and we think that even before the propaganda, before Maidan, before Ukraine, before all events, and so then 2013, so there was a huge upward spike of all phobias, all three phobias, and so we can see that in course of 15 years, actually it's longer than that, so the phobias toward the external enemies are higher and more exacerbated than the fear of internal enemies. So external enemies are much higher. And as I don't want just to spend time on that, just remember it as let it be a key takeaway. And let me characterize the situation. So in 2013, by the beginning of 2013, before all the events occurred, and so the society was ready to consolidate on the basis of certain phobias and fears and hatred. So because it has no foundation for consolidation of constructive opposition, And so that this phobias reached a certain maximum level. And now just I am moving over to the 4 assumptions that I'm going to discuss and to offer your attention and to argue later. Then that's a myth of stability, because they impose this myth on us. So the media keep talking about stability. And this type of propaganda doesn't work, by the way, because the main idea is that there is no stability. There is a certain semblance of the energy conservation law. So then there is a lot of protest, a lot of discontent. They just change form. So that it could manifest itself as political movements, or can turn into some religious or ethnic activity, both inside and outside the country. So the second point, and so then the demographic implications of those times. So then contradictive roles of Russian nationalism vis-a-vis present political regime, and how to exit those murky times. Then this necessary new agenda, a new alternative, alternatives to archaics and fundamentalism. So we need to find this for Russia, and that will be part of the new agenda. That is why, so the civil society policy and the agenda, we need to get ready to leave those murky, uncertain crisis times. And so now there's the law on conservation of energy. And Mr. Vasilyev, I think, he was head of the Institute of the Center of Strategic Research. Mr. Dmitriev, right? I got his name right. So before he stopped being the head of this center, so he published a report. That was the last report on this of this agency, that after May events 2012, the political activity in Russia collapsed. So they managed to squash it quickly. And no one argues that. But then, so there was a little amendment note added to this report, because there was a small note added to it, that nevertheless, so there are strange events occurring in the periphery of the country. There appears different types of activities. There's ethnic pogroms and ethnic cleansings. We cannot explain that, but I can explain, because I'm trying just to explain that this occurred not accidentally, because when you squash the areas of political activity, when the people can just throw out their pent-up energy, so it actually showed a certain kind of unity when people took to the streets. Nationalists, the left, the right, so everyone, liberals, conservatives went to the square, and then Occupy Abay and others. So they went to talk about that to other sites in Moscow. But after it all had been squashed, so the activities start to develop, evolve, and appear in different forms of shapes, in religious and ethnic discontent. Immediately, it morphed into it. So so then some years ago, there was only one Kandapoga, it's a public discontent area, and Kandapoga, or the only city where this conflict was. And then the conflict stopped, so there were no more. And in 2013, so there were 5 cities where the unrest, civil unrest, conflicts with between the locals and the immigrants, clashes, discontent, violence, blood shed. So there are many cities. So I am naming them. In Birylova in Moscow, Apraksin Dvor in St. Petersburg. Only the big ones, big events. So there were many more. And so this pent-up energy is squashed elsewhere, found its way here. So that's Mr. Chaika, the Attorney General, so he said that so the number of people convicted on extremist charges went up 5 times. But in 2014, so this there was this niche, so where all the conflicts is nothing compared to this new niche, Crimea and Donbass, because the pogroms they're limited in their magnitude, so that they give a chance just to vent the energy, but certainly because the leaders of the republics become unhappy, and then people are becoming apprehensive for the integrity of the state, and so this is the unified Russia, homogeneous Russia, and all of a sudden, so this is the biggest value is being eroded, and so that's why the leaders are unhappy. But here. I got this slogan, how the Russian Cossack kills a Bandera guy. So then people just are ready to fight for Russians in Donbass. It's a wonderful field for channeling the hatred and venting this. And then Kadyrov supports, Putin supports, and so the authorities. And so then the ladies just are screaming, so you real men just go fight, etc. And but what happens? So then a certain image appears that might help Russia to get out of this epoch of murky, undetermined times. Even in Georgia, there was the Project Russia. There was an ideological program, and there was a book, The Third Empire, so it was published in Georgia, where he portrayed Russia from Vladivostok to Kaliningrad, and so fully subjected to Russia. And when the book was published, I was laughing, because I did believe it would be possible, and so I even just wrote an article where I ridiculed those points of view because I thought the ideas were utopian. But now it actually realized that it actually materialized, and so then and we understand. So the times are changing. So even if so even if Lugansk and Donetsk Republic, I don't think that they will be supported by the Russian authorities, but when it occurred, there's a wonderful vent, wonderful valve, safety valve, through which the people's anger and frustration was channeled through. And I think that this I think that Professor Vorozhekina will talk about this issue from a different angle, and but I want to tell you that so then you may just draw any number of fantastic, crazy images or ideas, but actually everyone was buying this book, so they thought so it's impossible. So 3 years passed, and it turned out to be this is not a myth, because when there is no way out, when people cannot vent their feelings, so there is nothing to be proud of. So that the sociological studies, people were not ready. People were not ready to be proud of their country compared to other countries. So no prospects, nothing to be proud of. So, but now just we can register. We can be proud of your Winter Olympics and hockey victories, acquisition of territories, and the war. And so this is great. And so this feeling of spiritual revival is there because of this problems with Crimea and Ukraine. And so people now are proud and they're lively, vibrant, and so they have. So, but we live certainly in a land of fairy tales. Some people like it, some people don't like it, but there is certain fairy tale. But there is life, life, and this is all fairy tales, as I was saying. But we're going to talk about pragmatic, real life, and that restricts the capabilities of a human being to. So we cannot leave this fairy tale because it's just a fairy tale. But we like it. And so there are some demographic constraints that we need to talk about. Demographic constraints. And they're getting more and more exacerbated. And so demographic indicators are bad. Because they overlap, and so to make any demographics, so just to say that, for example, this regime gives a higher birth rate, and this political regime gives lower birth rate, and the times the troubles diminish birth rate, and this one increases the mortality rate. It's impossible to say that. To apply one on the other, very difficult. But the infant mortality works very well only for the evaluation of the rock bottom decline. So this indicator, so the high mortality rate in babies, is very telling characteristic that describes the situation very well. So, for example, where it's worse? In Africa. And so where you can compare it, and then you can always say, so if you compare it to Africa, so you certainly saw our situation is much better. But then, so there are some indicators that show the success of the country, which is the seniority, which is the lifespan. So lifespan, and that certainly bespeaks the quality of human life. And so this lifespan is definitely the characteristic. So because all the countries are ranged from the viewpoint of lifespan of their citizens. And our country, from Vladivostok to as they plan to go to Lisbon, it occupies 129th place. So this even just the lifespan. So out of all socialist countries and the former republics, so the lifespan is lowest. Only the Middle Asian republics have a lower lifespan than in Russia. So we occupy the 129th place from the viewpoint of lifespan. This is an independent characteristic. And so then about the age of the population. So according to the UN data and the demographic experts, so they concluded that the country is considered to be old if the share of the population over 65 years is 7%. In Russia, this figure is 12%. Twice as much. But even worse, the demographic situation in Russia, if you look at it from the viewpoint of expected lifespan. And it turns out that our 50-year-old person who has only 9 years to live before he dies, it's average statistics, because now just average lifespan of a male person is 59 years. So I'm talking about men, okay, not women, men. I'm talking.
Really, it's very important because I'm talking about men, and men are important for our discussion. So that 50-year man, Russian man, from the standpoint of expectation, is 9 years older than his Polish counterpart, 15 years older than U.S. Man, and 21 year older than his Swedish counterpart, which is very important, since today many countries address their economic problems by raising the retirement age, but try to raise that age to 65 years in Russia. Most of the men will not survive to that. What is changing the retirement age? That's the fundamental change of the principle of living that has already occurred in the planet. So the ratio of activity between younger and older years is changing. So it's moving towards the older age. It concerns productive activities, including new types of economy of knowledge and science and IT and others. As for health, even the birth rate indicators are changing, since for healthy people, even 60 years is nothing outstanding. So it's a fundamental change of the global living standards that have to do with the extension of life. What is most interesting here, it is the fact that by 1991, countries that left the social camp had similar demographic indicators, and Poland, Estonia, Latvia, the Czech Republic were no better than Russia. Several years passed, and the situation changed in a radical way. All countries, except Russia, made progress in terms of the extension of life expectancy, while it was not the case in Russia. Why? There are two reasons for that, obvious reasons. First, that's the ratio of social expenditures and military needs. The wise historian Kluchevsky, when he said that when the state is swelling, the population is getting thinner and thinner. And he was right, that the rise of costs for military needs, for all civil services and state functions, take something from the social expenditures, because our resources are not unlimited. So the budget is limited, the funds are limited. And recently I read on the website where I contribute to, I wrote an article that was mostly visited by readers. It was written by Mr. Hramchikhin, who is the military expert, and he was just mocking at the Czech Republic's, Hungary and Poland's armies, and saying that those armies are so small that cannot defend those countries and cannot wage a war. I understand that we have Poles in the room, and I met with them, but that's about the very truth. That's something that's special, that the countries that have capabilities to spend much less for the armed forces, which in case of an invasion from Mars may not defend Hungary from the aliens, but today they have a chance to increase the share of healthcare costs up to the European standards of 8% of the budget, while in Russia we cannot reach even 5%. And that is an important factor by itself. And there is another important factor that has to do with those hard, troubled times I was talking about. When you have a feeling of a stampede and in the cultures that are associated with drinking, that particular feelings are addressed through drinking, and that's not accidental why I began talking about men. Just trying to identify those problems. And it so happens that with all those bright plans to build Russia from Vladivostok to Lisbon, it's not that bright, and people still feel bad, and they address their concerns through drinking. I should say that vodka was invented in Poland. So Poland is also a vodka drinking country. I have separate stories about Finland and Sweden, and they used to be also vodka drinking countries, and the cultural standards were changed. But the fact that troubled times, hard times, had taken up lives of the Russians is an undoubtable fact. And I'm moving to some other implications of those circumstances. Here is the gender and age structure of one of the regions. It's the Kurchilayev municipality in Dagestan. It looks like a fir tree. It's not Dagestan, I'm corrected. It's Chechnya. Okay. But anyway, that's the Kurchilayevsky municipality. But should we take Dagestan example, nothing would change because that's the traditional gender and age structures, and that's like a third tree. So in the territory of Russia, we have only one zone, one area with that phenomenon. It's Dagestan, it's Chechnya, in a lesser degree it's North Ossetia. So the republics of North Caucasus are the only keepers of that type of demographic development. And if you look outside that region, the picture changes entirely. It's kind of an oak tree. Great number of people in labor age with very few children. And the question arises, where do all that labor come from to Russian cities when children are very few? The answer is quite obvious. Those are migrants. They came from the places where children are not a few. And this kind of redistribution results in the following picture. That's the map of the Kostroma Oblast, Kostroma region, and the colors indicate the density of population. Some areas lost more than 60% of their population, and that loss cannot be replenished. Those territories were developed in the 15th and 16th centuries, and the dynasty of Romanov came from that area. So we watched on television the history of the Romanovs family, but they say nothing about the tragedy of that territory. So 1/3 of the territory is dead. It cannot be restored. And more than 2/3 are the areas which theoretically, under certain circumstances, cannot be or can be restored or repopulated, but the loss of the population ranges from 20 to 60%. And there is only one very small area around the city of Kostroma, which is still alive, showing some growth of population, because that vacuum cleaner of the city of Kostroma sucked in all viable population from other areas of the region. That's our worst region, and that's the pole of Russian disaster. The city is nice, yes. And here comes the black soil region. That's the Kursk region. And black soil is believed to be the best soil for agriculture. But looks like in this region, situation is not much better. There is a small area around the city of Kursk, which is showing some progress, some growth. Otherwise, it's a vast and abandoned area. Here is the Altai region, another great place to live. And the difference is that not only Barnaul, but all other smaller cities and towns, such as Biysk, Rubtsovsk, and Taleisk, they are still viable, while the rest of the territory is devastated. So on a monthly basis, the country is losing more territories than it acquired through the acquisition of a new subject of the federation. And looks like the process cannot be reversed. And it means that the labor and demographic resources can be only replenished through those zones with third tree situations. And what would it mean? And it would mean that with the current level of tolerance, conflicts and clashes and the rise of xenophobia are inevitable. I would take all your questions responding to the nature of anti-Western feelings, but first I would outline one more difference. Western phobias, are such that if by some misfortune all TV channels are dead for a month, then 1 month later you will notice that there is no Western phobia at all. There will be no anti-Western feelings, but it's not the case with the internal phobias, because the majority of the Americans are not physical for the Russian people. The Russian people think of them as some images, and they've never seen them. But those internal foes, they are everywhere. They are in public transport, in the streets. They are everywhere around us, and that clash is much more feasible and likely. And the situation is quite obvious. If all TV channels, radio stations will keep on saying then tolerance is really required, I hardly think that friendship between the peoples will come on the following day. Those are the real ratios and balances. I'll give you another idea or a number of ideas, and then I'll stop talking and we'll have Q&A and discussion. So who will make use, take advantage of the xenophobia's rise? Traditional Russian nationalism used to be the imperial nationalism. It was something that was safeguarding the state, and the nationalism that supported the power. And it was also nationalism supporting the authoritarian rule. However, since the state itself acquired the functions assumed the functions of the imperial nationalism, the people's nationalism became useless, and it is gradually given way to another kind of Russian nationalism, which is anti-empire. And for those who are interested, I can refer to the last copy of the magazine, Pro and Contra, which is closed now. And there is my article analyzing the dynamics of the ratio of imperial and anti-imperial nationalism. And in Russian nationalist elites, that latter nationalism is becoming a leader. So the link between Russian nationalism with the power is not linear. On the contrary, it's quite complex. Dr. Krylov, one of the prominent scholars, says that the nationalism is the anti-imperial phenomenon. It's not the people for the country, but the country for the people. That's the basis of the national mindsets. And the Russian nationalism phenomenon, it's a new phenomenon which we saw rising from the middle of the past decade in the period in 2005, 2006. And in Russian nationalism, we can see various branches. Russian Democratic Alliance, for instance, led by Sharapayev, Dabenko, and it's growing extremely high. I keep on monitoring them. Lately, they gave up the basic thesis of all Russian nationalists, that Russians is the core nation for the country. And now they say that we are not calling upon the establishment of the only Russian state. We would favor the ways of the European Union so that we can merge with the European Union and make a unified single community with it. And that's already a centric Russian nationalism, and that's a separate topic. And I think that the emergence of such a trend, I interpret it as a winner out from the imperial thinking, because all empires ended up with some alternative nationalism, and civic nationalism emerged in Russia even before the national. So my latest or last remarks. Those troubled times, hard times, are nearing its end. That epoch leads to public apathy, and it is supported, it rests upon that apathy. But in Russia, apathy is being substituted by unprecedentedly high social alarm. So far, the authorities managed to use that alarm for their sustainability and survival, but without any transformation, or this transformation is not unlimited. So the main idea is that we need an alternative agenda. That's the point I started with, and I could only reiterate by saying that the objective of such schools as yours is to change the situation when we have only Prokhanov and Limonov groups and nobody else in opposition. Okay, so I will be prepared to voice my opinion on that alternative agenda, but I'll try to do it in my answers to your questions. Colleagues, discussion is open. Anton, please. I'm Anton Petrov from St. Petersburg. Thank you very much for this opportunity to ask a question. Thank you very much, Emil Abramovich, for your lecture. It's as good as your previous ones. So all of them were excellent. And you are the best lecturer. We found out that we have no past or future. It's only the current time that matters. So you belong to that current time. You placed an emphasis on right movements as some prerequisite for development and for the emergence of a new agenda. But I can refer to a very popular figure in media, who is Konstantin Rikemchuk, who is quite a well-balanced man, and he argues that Russia, in fact, is a left country, and the only movement that can really make the system moving is left movements, even more left than we can hear from the powers rhetoric. Although I agree with you that when you say that right movements can also be viewed as the prerequisite of development. So it's a paradox that, in fact, the country's left sticks to the left, but you rely on right movements. And in the rhetoric with Ukraine, and it also belongs to the left spectrum. So thank you. Microfonчик. It's not accidental that I kept on talking for nearly an hour, so I hope that you would pick up something about that and you would ask that question. Okay, so I'm switching to the left. First of all, I don't believe that the country tends to the left by its culture. What is left movement? It's based on the idea of equality, but the Russian main saying says that I don't care how things are with me. I would be delighted if a cow of my neighbor would die. So, the idea of having neighbor's cow die is even prevailing in the conditions of xenophobia. But what I refer to as imperial nationalism is gaining very clear traces of national and socialist movement, not in the German sense, but in terms of merging the idea of socialism and the idea of a great nation. I published an article called The Revival of the Empire in Manual Mode, and tried to indicate that the revival of the empire, and the empire is revived already. In early 1990s, there were no ideas of the revival of empire. There were no signs of something that would resemble situations in Romania, Hungary, or Serbia. There were no cry and nostalgia about the Soviet Union. There was zero interest to the Soviet Union in the early 1990s. And it was restored phase by phase. And first, the Soviet past was revived. After that came the empire idea. So the revival of the socialist times is something that people are more customary to has happened. And the national and socialist nationalism is now in the inventory of one side, that's the power. And therefore the opposition and the nationalist opposition not to get lost in this world in order to be significant and meaningful. That kind of opposition is getting more and more anti-socialist and anti-authoritarian. And you can read some theses, some papers of those that are published by those movements. And I think both Khodorkovsky and Remchikov's visions are borrowed visions. What they say, it's a template. Nobody measured the degree of leftist sentiments in this country. None of them measured the level of imperial mindsets, mentality. And you didn't ask me that question, but I'll answer that immediately. The reason why the entire Western feelings are so strong in this country, and 80% of the population live in Europe by geography, and in 18th, 19th century, the country played an important role in Europe. And the Western sentiments in the country used to be quite high. Why those anti-Western phobias are stronger than even phobias against minorities. It's because it's in the Soviet time that the West was not only a geopolitical enemy, it was also the class enemy, and no compromise was possible. Marxist theory referred to that as antagonistic relations. That's exactly 100% Soviet template. So in 1991 through 1993, according to the Central Statistics Agency, 2/3 of the Russian population said that West is our model for the future. And then out of a sudden, West has become our main enemy. So in 1991, only 12% of the population believed that the West was the enemy. In 1995, 45%. In 1998, 65%. And in 1999, I showed it already to you. So gradually, as the Soviet aspirations were restored, the anti-Western feelings came back to their place. And in Donetsk, in Transnistria, the consolidation is taking place not around the Russian ideals, but about the Soviet ideals. And those are the people who are raised on the ideals promoted by the Zavtra daily or weekly. And Baradai, who is the Prime Minister of Donetsk, self-proclaimed Donetsk Republic, he used to be on the editorial board of the Zavtra weekly. So I think now it's more relevant to speak not on the leftist movements, but on the revival of Soviet ideals, which bring to life more stereotypes. Sorry for that long answer, but I just combined a couple of questions that were not asked really. I'm turning the floor to Tatiana Vorozhekina, who is our expert. Sorry for intervention, but I would like to ask one question. First of all, I would like to put your first thesis, first assumption under doubt. You said that protest movements are changing shape, like the law of preserved energy. If they are suppressed in the political sphere or slowed down in the political sphere, they will splash, they would outburst in the national and other areas. Well, just geographically, we saw political protests in Moscow, in St. Petersburg, but Kanda, Pogar, and other ethnic conflicts, they take place in entirely different places and locations, except for the Berylova case. And the approximate, 2 out of 5, it's not an exception. It's not a full coincidence, I understand. My second argument, I was participating in one of the Levada Center polls, asking protesters our questions, and I really carried out that poll, and there was a question: which ideological movement you think you belong to? And the overwhelming majority, from 60 to 80%, said they were liberals or Democrats. And despite the dozens of black and yellow flags, those who associated themselves with nationalists never increased 5 to 7%. And I think that makes your assumption quite doubtful. How can they explain that? Are those two different energies? No, it's the same energy, but you should see really country-wise. Dr. Dmitriev said that political rallies were held in Moscow, and others, ethnic conflicts, were in the periphery, in the remote regions. I wrote a book about the ethnic and political pendulums, and I tried to show that geographies and forces keep on changing on the time scale. At some point, it's Moscow that becomes the center of all those events, and in Moscow it's gaining a more political character, although ethnic extremism is also very strong in Moscow. It's the strongest than in any other place. Moscow has the most number of ethnic radicals, Moscow and St. Petersburg. So, but country-wise, the ratio between various groups is changing, and the groups that become visible sometimes there is the demand in political rhetoric, and while some groups come to the forefront, then there is a shift to some other areas, and then it's some other forces become proactive in the regions. But that critical mass of opposition is floating. I'm not saying that Gary Gasparov carried a slogan for calling for fair elections, and then he would carry something like beat them and save Russia.
What I'm trying to say, however, is that the composition of this activity does change. And the interrelated forces and the actors work in a manner of an unbalanced pendulum. Some new people come to the fore, some concede their place, some would go to the square and then could have supported the mobsters in Birilyova. And this is something that I might have told you about when I was talking about the changes in the profile of social activities of the masses. Daria Pigaleva from Nizhny Novgorod. You said that, in your opinion, Russia needs an alternative agenda. But when we talk about the agenda, a social agenda, as it was first proposed in the 1970s, then such an agenda was usually subdivided into several levels and several categories. What specific kind of agenda do you imply, and what do we have to do to formulate this? Well, this is the question that I have provoked many times, but I can tell you that I am teaching special some special disciplines. What do I know as a professional? What changes need to be introduced with respect to the changing agenda? We understand that most actors today are not interested in changing the agenda, and there are those who believe, and this is the case. There are others. There are some ideas which need to be taken into account. The first thing is that our society and that stratum of the society which is proposing such agenda should indeed abandon the way of thinking whereby Russia has no alternative future, or in other words, that Russia's future is predetermined. Such people must abolish the thinking whereby the Russians and then you can start with a long series of stereotypes, and these stereotypes are very pervasive, and they in many ways paralyze free thinking. While I read Facebook and can see what some of my friends say, I'm sometimes startled how close they are to the people in the opposite camp. And some say that it is good that Russia has its own path, and the opponents say, well, it's a pity that Russia has its special path, and this idea of a special path is quite standard. It has been used by thousands of years in hundreds of countries in the same way. This is a classical way of the conservatives not to change anything, but to show that some changes or something new is against the traditional, conventional, customary way of thinking of the particular nation or conglomerate of nations. Such thinking must be abandoned, and we should be talking about this at all forums and trying to communicate this to those around us. That's the first thing. Another thing is, and also very important, is the trust towards one's people. And here, the best example for me is the example of Ukraine and the example of Maidan. The people who are defending Maidan and people who go to Maidan in Kiev perceive their peoples very differently. The people in Ukraine go to Maidan saying that the people is invincible and that the people will support us, and these go out with the idea that we are not understood. And they only work for a very narrow stratum in somewhat sects or the very narrow groups. So without a proper understanding that a political party must orient itself towards the entire population and not a narrow group, you can't move elsewhere. And if you believe that people will not support you, that means you're a political loser. You should do something else in your life. So I think that these are the very important psychological observations. And three, finally, we have to be building the opposition liberal program, not imitating the program that was indeed in the basis of political fundamentalists. There is this dispute about the special historical path. And some say that there is no special historical path. There's always been the Rus of Pskov and Rus of Novgorod, and I'm frankly think that there is no trace, there is no tradition coming from say, Novgorod or Pskov. You can say that history has said that nothing was banned. But we know this for a fact. I think that the most important point in this agenda is not the dispute about the new tradition, but the fact that Russia's competitive advantage, the competitive advantage of the Russians, is the high adaptability and high ability for innovation. This, I think, can be proven, and this can be seen on many different examples. On the example of cultural borrowings, on the example of what can be seen on the experience of our country and other countries. And I'm trying to show this in my series of anthropological essays. I'm trying to show how, after the experience of living under totalitarian regimes, people use their cultural heritage. The Spanish and the Portuguese used the so-called communality junta principle. And of course, the roles of these institutions under Salazar or Franco are always emphasized. Well, Russia doesn't have such institutions, but what Russia has, for instance, is that Russia has a unique place in the world by the level of the social networks and their distribution. And I know, not only on the example of your school, but on the example of other schools, of other institutions is that it is amazing how interested, involved, and concerned people can be. So one should be looking for niches. There has to be some creative approach. Thank you. Daria Chernysova. I can make a conclusion. It turns out that this wish for survival and the turning to the traditional values is more artificial than spontaneous. And it turns to be some sort of intent, and they were hyperbolized. Well, unfortunately, lectures cannot substitute with the whole course. And there is not much knowledge in anthropology, and not many people understand what is tradition, what is their mechanism, and what are the invented traditions. Very important element of and a very well-known political social scientist Giddens believe that 80% of what we call today tradition is not a tradition, but rather an invented thing, an invented tradition, which have been legitimized through the concept of tradition. Now, many of the traditions have just been invented, and I would certainly recommend you reading Hobsbawm's Innovation and Tradition, and you will see many examples as to how so-called traditions were not traditional or customary, but were rather devised or invented by the authors, by specific people. Today, I can say that many people today revolve, and there are some people who I can tell you in this article, and it says that the return of the empire in the manual regime. How does this happen with the respect to some the specialized slogans and creeds? All slogans and creeds proposed with respect to the so-called Donetsk Republic were written by Mr. Zyuganov and other nationalists back to 1992 and 1993. There are books published, articles published, papers published, but for 5 years nobody cared about these except for a very few persons. Time has passed, and they're now being used. Then they enter the mass media, and so the good vodka first becomes imperial, and then everything becomes imperial. Empire is good, imperial is the best, and then you're starting this construct, building up the so-called tradition. Sergei Kovalyov from Volgograd. Several years ago, I heard a term about eterna nullis. Terra nullis, no man's land. When there are less than, say, 3 persons on a square kilometer, then this becomes no man's land, or terra nullis. Reverting to your maps and to those so-called dust suckers which take in the entire population, I'm asking myself, is it possible to lay claims to Russia because you have so much land and you don't use it efficiently? And there is such a small a country like Japan could have, say, used your land much more efficiently. Well, from the standpoint of today's international norms, there is no ground, there is no reason to believe that any land can be taken from one country because you don't cultivate it. This is my land. I manage it as I think fit. This is the principle, the prevalent principle of the international law today. There are some limitations of sovereignty, of course, if you are insulting the dignity of your subjects, and if you are violating the human rights, then there may be some theoretical ground for intervention. But with respect to the use of land or land and land use, no, there is no. It's not to be. One is not to be afraid that somebody will come from the outside and tell us something or try to rob us. This outside enemy is in many ways a myth. But what should one be afraid of is that the land without use is wasted. So, especially with today's level of production, if the production levels are high, then people can afford having less people in Alaska than, say, in New York City. But with the high rates, these can compensate for the underload. But in other cases, there are some simple consequences. And there are the ecological wastes and the ecological losses, which is the impoverishment of soil, deforestation, salination, acid rains, and so on and so forth. These are not things to be neglected. These are not things to be ignored by the people who live in wide expanses. And there are people who still live in the abandoned villages. Then you can see what's happening. These places are dying out. Either you have to supply them by aviation, or what do you do? What do you do with these distant localities when the country is not just it is becoming like the skeleton of a herring, and you can immediately get to the transaction costs increase, the transportation costs increase, the social rifts, and a host of problems which derive from such inefficient land use. Elizabeth from Poland. Thank you very much. Elżbieta Jacques from Poland. From the standpoint of anthropology, how does this new Soviet mythology, this Soviet mythology revisited? How sustainable are they? Do you believe that this bubble will just blow up? And do you think that irony can help, or the people has indeed lost any sense of irony? Well, everything I have said is a response to your question. So it will be very difficult for me to repeat this. But this is indeed the anything can be thought up for some time. you can even get 70 to 80%, you can fool 70 to 80% of all adult population, but only for some time, because then you have to correlate the myth with the reality. Eating, moving around, giving birth to children, educating them, there's a lot of discomfort associated with such unfounded ways of propagating such myths. So how should one be woken up? Well, you can scratch the person and he'll wake up. Now, these scratches will come from the real-time problems that people will wake up with. There is another thing here, and that is very important. There is this idea which is the worse, the better. The worse it is, the better. The worse it is, the sooner we will wake up. That's not true. I disagree with that, because with today's configuration, the worse is the worse. Because there are new myths queuing up, which are even more dangerous. Ekaterina Kopriyanova from Perm. In the framework of, in the search of an alternative agenda for Russia, what is your view of the need for an nationwide idea for Russia that could unite such different ethnicities and cultural arrangements that coexist in Russia? People speak Russian on this land, it is true, but what is it? Is it, say, the 19th century, the Russian music or the Russian literature, which may be such a unifying force? Well, let me try to answer this question in a somewhat expanded or extended way. What is my perception of a nation? It is a community which is has a commonality not just of passports but also of culture and ideology. So it is quite close to Dankwart Ruster, who believes that the only preliminary condition for democracy is a nation state or a nation. An empire is not in a position to build a democracy, and I agree with this entirely. Let me quote another expert, Jenkins, who said that the people may decide if we decide on what is the people. So the very first thing to be defined is that who are we, what are the borders, our borders, what is our relation to other communities. So there has to be some a level of symbiosis. And unless it exists, the communities will be very disjoined or so without this general idea or general concept, no alternative agenda will ever work. So the formulation of an agenda, alternative agenda, must be related or connected with some general ideas. And these general ideas should be coming not from ethnic, but from the civic culture. The elements of a civic culture are participation, participatory culture. The main idea of such participation is that we, the people, are the source of power, of the source of authority. This very simple idea has been the most contended concept for centuries. But the people should indeed be the source of power, and not be regarded as a conglomerate of statistical nobodies who come to vote once every 4 years. It is really about the true conscience and the true consciousness and the perception of your own place within the state. From 1989, I do not remember when the Universal Declaration of the Human Rights were, but since that time, nothing new has been brought out. The universalist values in the basis of this declaration are indeed in the basis of civic nation. The last question will also be from Poland. Katarzyna Jabrzynska from Poland. My question will continue my colleague's question. If I may ask you about the steps undertaken by the Russian government to prevent the negative consequences of this ideological bubble blowing up. Well, you have a very good. Jolly good opinion of our state. Well, thank you, Katarzyna. Here is my very good acquaintance, whom I know from Poland. She has not warned me about this question coming up. So let me tell her and you that this government is not doing anything to try and prevent the negative or the adverse consequences of what will happen when the myth dissipates. The person at the head of the government thinks that everything he's doing is proper, and he is indeed afraid of other myths, and he's trying to neutralize these other myths that he's afraid of. But he's not afraid of this myth, and he doesn't think that he. So I think this fairy tale time, the fairy tale epoch will continue to prevail for some longer time in Russia. Colleagues, no questions will be asked during this session, which is up as our time is up for this session. I think that Mr. Pain's contribution to this seminar is quite commensurate with the topic that has been defined. You are fortunate to have met Mr. Pain alongside with other experts of this week, and we thank Emil Abramovich for attending our seminars. A 30-minute break.